He crossed borders illegally. He transported prohibited substances. He protected thieves and criminals, and the Greeks worshipped him like a god. Do you think you know the story of Hermes? Prepare to have your mind blown. In the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal the dark side of the most controversial god of Olympus, a truth that history books try to hide. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why Hermes would be arrested in this day and age. Turn on the notification bell because this is going to turn your view of mythology upside down. The first crime, the perfect setup. Imagine the scene. A baby just a few hours old. Most newborns can barely open their eyes. But Hermes, this prodigy, was already planning his first heist. On the day of his birth, while his mother Maya slept exhausted in the cave, little Hermes simply disappeared. Where did he go? Straight to execute the most audacious robbery in mythological history. The target? None other than Apollo, the god of the sun, music, and prophecy, one of the most powerful gods of Olympus. And what did Hermes steal from him? 50 sacred cows. But here's the detail that will make you rethink everything. Hermes wasn't an ordinary baby committing a childish crime. He knew exactly what he was doing. First, he tied branches to the cows' tails to erase the footprints. Then he made the cows walk backwards to confuse any tracker. Finally, he put on his sandals upside down, leaving tracks that pointed in the opposite direction. That's not instinct. That's premeditation. A baby just hours old executing a plan worthy of a cartel leader. And when Apollo finally confronted him, do you know what Hermes did? He looked into the eyes of the sun god and lied shamelessly. Me? Steal cows? But I was born yesterday. I barely know what a cow is. But the story doesn't end there. And this is where things start to get really disturbing. Zeus, the king of the gods, did not punish Hermes. He didn't banish him. He didn't punish him. Instead, he gave the criminal baby a promotion. Zeus made Hermes the official messenger of the gods, giving him the authority to cross any border, enter any realm, including the underworld of the dead. Total free access. Divine diplomatic immunity. Think about that for a second. An individual who has demonstrated from birth the ability to sophisticated criminal planning, psychological manipulation, falsification of evidence, convincing lying, receives a free pass to move between worlds unsupervised. What could possibly go wrong? The true business of Hermes. Here's where the official story begins to crumble like a house of cards. In ancient texts, Hermes is called Psychopompos, the guide of souls. Beautiful, poetic, even romantic. But let's look critically at what that really means. Hermes had an absolute monopoly on transportation between the world of the living and the dead. He was the only one authorized to make that crossing. No soul could cross without him. Doesn't that remind you of something? Exclusive territorial control. A route that only he could operate. An essential service on which everyone depended. In modern language, we call that a cartel. And his clients? They weren't just ordinary souls. Hermes transported secret messages between gods, carried forbidden items between realms, facilitated clandestine meetings. When Zeus needed to seduce a mortal without Hera finding out, Hermes was the messenger. When Hades needed to do business on Mount Olympus, Hermes was the intermediary. When heroes needed magical items borrowed from forbidden places, guess who showed up? Hermes was the broker, the facilitator, the middleman, the protector of criminals. This is not a figure of speech. But wait, there's more. And this will shock you. Hermes wasn't just accused of crimes. He was officially recognized as the patron of thieves, dishonest merchants, and swindlers. That's right. The thieves themselves made offerings to Hermes before their robberies. They built pillars called Hermes at crossroads, strategic points where illicit business took place. Imagine this today, a Catholic saint whose specialty was blessing bank robbers, a Buddhist temple dedicated exclusively to fraudsters, a mosque that celebrates smugglers. It would be absurd, right? But in ancient Greece, this was perfectly normal when it came to Hermes. Why? Because Hermes represented something that Greek society understood, but pretended not to see. The underworld is an essential part of the economy, the parallel economy of Olympus. Let's connect the dots that academics prefer to ignore. 1. Hermes controlled trade, both legal and illegal. He was the god of merchants, but also of merchants who sold alternative goods. 2. Hermes dominated communication. He knew all the secrets, all the messages. Information is power, and Hermes had a monopoly on information. 3. Hermes had total immunity. He could go anywhere without being questioned. Olympus, the underworld, Earth. No borders, no laws. 4. Hermes protected criminals, not just occasionally, but as part of his official divine portfolio. Put all that together and you don't have a friendly messenger. You have the profile of a criminal operations boss on a divine scale. Act 3. The damning evidence case. 1. The rescue of Ares. When Ares, the god of war, was captured and imprisoned by giants in a bronze jar, who came to his rescue? Hermes. But here's the disturbing detail. He didn't use force. There was no epic battle. Hermes simply negotiated. He arrived, talked to the kidnappers, and left with Ares. How exactly does an innocent messenger have credibility and bargaining power with criminals who kidnapped a god of war? The obvious answer: because he did business with these kinds of people regularly. Case 2. The murder of Argos. This story is told as a heroic act, but let's re-examine the facts. Hera had placed the giant Argos, with his 100 eyes that never all slept at the same time, to guard Io, one of Zeus's lovers transformed into a cow. Zeus wanted to free Io, so he called Hermes, and Hermes, he didn't save Io with cunning or magic. He murdered Argos. Mythology romanticizes this by saying that Hermes lulled Argos to sleep with music and stories. But the end of the story is clear. He cut off the giant's head. This is a contract killing. Zeus couldn't get his own hands dirty, so he called his messenger, who had experience in discreetly solving problems. Case 3. The sale of Heracles. This is perhaps the most disturbing story. When Hercules was condemned to slavery as punishment for a crime, who organized the sale? Hermes. The messenger god literally acted as a human trafficker, selling the greatest hero of Greece into slavery to Queen Omphale. Mythology tries to justify this by saying it was divine punishment, or part of Heracles' destiny. But the fact remains, Hermes actively facilitated human trafficking. If that happened today, he would be on Interpol's most wanted list. But what if you're asking the wrong question? Here's where everything flips. We've spent all this time accumulating evidence that Hermes was a criminal, and all the evidence points to yes. But there's a bigger, deeper question that completely changes the narrative. What if Hermes wasn't the villain of the story? What if he was the only honest god? Think about it. While other gods pretended to be virtuous, Zeus raped mortals and lied to Hera. Poseidon drowned sailors in his tantrums. Ares promoted wars for his own entertainment. Aphrodite destroyed families out of jealousy. Hermes never pretended to be what he wasn't. Was he the god of thieves? Yes, and he didn't hide it. Did he cross borders illegally? Yes, because the borders were artificial. Did he protect criminals? Yes, because he understood that criminal is a definition created by the powerful. The philosophical revolution of Hermes. Here's the truth that will blow your mind. Hermes was the only god who treated rich and poor, gods and mortals, living and dead, equally. He guided the soul of a king with the same care as he guided the soul of a beggar. He helped famous heroes and anonymous thieves. He did not judge. While the other gods of Olympus maintained rigid hierarchies and demanded expensive sacrifices, Hermes could be honored with a simple pile of stones at a crossroads. He was the god of the people, the god of those who had no voice, the god of those who needed to operate in the shadows because the official system had excluded them. The true substance: he trafficked. Now we come to the core of the matter. What did Hermes truly transport between worlds? It wasn't drugs. It wasn't illegal goods in the modern sense. Hermes trafficked possibilities. He carried messages that changed destinies. He transported souls between worlds that supposedly shouldn't connect. He facilitated encounters that divine rules forbade. He provided tools, like the winged sandals and the helmet of invisibility, that gave mortals powers reserved for the gods. He democratized divine power, and that, for the Olympian establishment, was the most dangerous crime of all. Asked 4. The hidden lesson. Why did the Greeks love a criminal? Here's what historians are reluctant to admit. The ancient Greeks were pragmatic. They understood that society doesn't function solely on written laws and official morality. They knew that. Commerce needs flexibility. Sometimes that means bending absurd rules. Communication needs neutrality. Sometimes that means working with both sides. Survival needs creativity. Sometimes that means stealing from those who have too much. Hermes wasn't celebrated. Despite being a trickster, he was celebrated because he was a trickster. He represented adaptive intelligence, the ability to navigate complex and often unjust systems to survive and prosper. The Code of Hermes. Looking at all the stories, a consistent ethical code emerges. 1. Loyalty to clients. Hermes never betrayed anyone who entrusted him with a message or soul. 2. Absolute competence. He always delivered what he promised, no matter the difficulty. 3. Professional neutrality. He worked for Zeus, but also for Hades, for heroes, but also for ordinary mortals. 4. Protection of the vulnerable. His criminal clients were often the weakest in society. 5. Honesty about himself. Unlike other gods, he never pretended to be holy. Compare this to the hypocrisy of the respectable gods, and you will understand why Hermes was so loved. The uncomfortable truth. So, we return to the initial question. Was Hermes a trafficker? The honest answer is, it depends on who writes the laws. If you define trafficker as someone who moves resources across restrictive borders, connects people that the system wants to keep separate, facilitates transactions that challenge the monopoly of power, operates in an essential but unofficial parallel economy, then yes, Hermes was a trafficker. But here's the final twist that will haunt you. You are too. Every time you use a VPN to access content blocked in your region, every time you buy something from another country to avoid exorbitant taxes, every time you share a streaming password, every time you bring medicine from one country to another because it's inaccessible where you live, you are being Hermes. You are trafficking possibilities across artificial borders created by systems you didn't create and often don't agree with. The question that matters. The real question was never whether Hermes was a criminal. The real question has always been, who decides what is a crime? The gods on Olympus created rules that benefited them. Borders between worlds, hierarchies, monopolies of power. And Hermes looked at those rules and said, but what about those who are harmed by these rules? He became the intermediary, the bridge, the one who makes possible what should be impossible. Do they call that a crime? He called it justice. And now what? You've made it this far. Your view of Hermes, and perhaps the very concept of criminal, will never be the same. Greek mythology wasn't just entertainment. It was a complex system of moral philosophy disguised as stories about gods. And Hermes? He was the personification of an uncomfortable truth that every society faces. The official system never tells the whole story. There's always a parallel economy, an alternative justice system, people operating on the margins not because they are evil, but because the center is inaccessible. 3 final questions for you. 1. How many criminals in history were actually people challenging unjust systems? 2. If you lived in ancient Greece, would you honor Zeus, the established power, or Hermes, the disruptor? 3. In your own life, when are you Olympus and when do you need a Hermes? Leave in the comments, is Hermes a hero or a villain? And more importantly, does it still matter? Share this text with someone who needs to question what criminal really means. And subscribe, because next week we'll reveal which Greek goddess was actually a serial killer who was never punished. Hint, it's not who you're thinking. Mythology is darker than you were taught, and reality is more like the myths than you imagine.